Hello, I've heard you loud and clear, and I'm cutting everything from now on. No more wasted time, just straight to the action. But I am going to waste some time in thanking everybody for the incredible response. I've gotten some enthusiastic encouragement and quite a few questions about how I work and what I work on, so here are a few spoilers for upcoming episodes. We've got an original Tamagotchi with screen and battery issues. We've got a Texas Instruments Speak and Math. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Speak and Spell, but this was the one that I grew up with, which is mostly math-based. If you guys are also haunted by the Choose the Operation. But this one had screen issues, apparently, and there was a slight battery issue. And lastly, a special request from a friend. This was a Super Game Boy that was originally from a Goodwill auction, and it works intermittently, so we're going to open it up, talk about it, and clean off some of the pads. And now for the good stuff. The big question on everyone's mind is, what do I look like? What Game Boy game is this? Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, there are indexes online full of serial numbers. The bad news is, they don't all agree. Some have one on one list, and others have completely different sets on others. That said, there was one match on GitHub. There was a poster who posted the code dump of a Game Boy emulator, including the codes that it would use to identify different Game Boy ROMs that were run through it. It was the only exact match to the actual Game Boy cartridge serial that corresponds to this game. And that game is Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle. Now the interesting thing here is that this game was actually completely different in Japan. It was actually called Mickey Mouse, versus in Europe and the US it was distributed as Bugs Bunny. Now when I said that there was only a partial match, I wanted to show you that this cartridge actually has the label BBE, as opposed to the Bugs Bunny original cartridge is only BB. So I'm placing my bet that this is the European version of Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle, but we'll have to get it working to be sure. Alright, so here's what we have to do. Replace the contact pads with copper strips. Prep and solder the wires to the pads. Score and prep the traces. Solder the traces to the wires. But this job was a bit much for my soldering iron, so I finally bit the bullet on some soldering hot air station that I've been eyeing for a while so I can stop struggling so much with my microscopic SMD components. Anyway, along with the station we're gonna need some tools. The last thing I wanted to mention was a stroke of bad luck. The original case for this mystery game has begun to disintegrate. After breaking the news to Mr. Durka, he told me that it happens all the time with stuff he digs up when it gets released from its constant pressure, temperature, and humidity in the ground. Once these things hit fresh air, they usually fall apart pretty quickly. That said, I have a plan to preserve this securely enough to make it back over the pond. More on that later. So as we talked about in the last episode, you can see a line here that was created by the actual cartridge casing being pushed down on top of the leads over so much time. So those all will need to be replaced. So every single one of these little traces we're going to have to score with an X-Acto knife and then connect them to the pads. Now some of these pads seem like they might still be usable. Definitely going to have to replace these two here and some of these other ones that are severed up near the top. So maybe even that one there. To be fixing that, what I'm going to use is 3mm double-sided conductive copper foil tape. It's a lot like normal foil tape that you would see pretty much anywhere else from a hardware store. I got mine on Amazon. Again, it's about 3mm. So if we take a look at the actual width here, you can see that each one of these pads is probably somewhere around 4mm. Maybe just over 5. Either way, we'll cut some strips. As long as they are in the center of the pad, we shouldn't have an issue at all. So we'll replace the pads. We'll score each of the traces. We've got some flux that we'll use to help the scored traces actually adhere to the solder. And for that, we are not going to be using this flux. So I'm not sure if you guys have looked on Amazon for flux or anything like that. This is the cheapest one that's going to be there. However, this is for plumbing. This is not for electronics. So even though it seems like it's small and perfect, only for plumbing. Instead, we'll be using this. And this is the MG Chemicals version of liquid flux. It's lead-free and there's no cleanup, and it should basically evaporate once we're done soldering. And basically what this does is help create a little bit more of a conductive environment for our solder to reach those connector pads, whether they're the replaced ones or the originals. So, here we go. The first thing we're going to do is secure the cartridge to the mat. We're just using standard Scotch tape, but this should keep it from wiggling while we're working on it. Scotch tape is safe for electronics. There's no real reason to use electrical tape or anything like that. So the first thing we'll do is start clearing some of these pads. Now the one thing that we don't need to do is to maintain an electrical connection between the existing pad and the new one that we're going to be putting on here. So scraping this off is really just trying to make a solid surface to stick the adhesive foil tape to. As you can see, we're having some issues with the process. The scoring with the X-Acto knife opens up the underlying PCB to oxidation and it started disintegrating. While normal PCB does melt at around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, the protective coating and the structure of the PCB give it more heat tolerance for soldering irons and hot air guns. Combined with the adhesive melting on the copper tape, this is becoming a real fool's errand. You can see the progress I've made off camera. I'll finish it up without wasting your time filming and editing and just get to the reveal on the final test. As always, thank you for your support. I'm having a great time doing this even if it is just the weekends for now. Until next time, so long.